Hello, all, and welcome to episode 3 of Point to Point, the hockey podcast where we keep things brief but discuss everything that has gone on around the National Hockey League since the last time we spoke to all of you. My name is Liam Go Time Godimer. Alongside me, as always, is my good friend and co host, Michael Shades Sparacino.
How we doing, Liam?
How are you doing? It's great to be back with you, my man.
Well, celebrated a friend's 30th last night, late night, but that's my boy. So we had a great night.
So, you're explaining to all of the listeners and viewers why your voice is a tad more raspy than usual.
Very late night and just not a good night of sleep.
Not a good
Worth
night
it?
of sleep? No.
No. Nope.
Well, Shades, let's turn the page from that and talk about what's been going on around the National Hockey League. It's been 2 weeks since we've had an episode of Point to Point. And Shades, the biggest piece of news to go through the cycle around the NHL, Leo Carlsson and the offer sheet that came forth via Danny Briere and the Philadelphia Flyers, an enormous price tag. 5 years, $90 million. And the question was for a good while, would the Anaheim Ducks stay to their word and match any offer sheet that came their way? They ended up matching. Let's talk about this whole situation from the very beginning. Just the offer sheet coming from the Flyers to start us off, Shades. How do you evaluate that?
Well, I'll give you my first reaction when you first sent it in the group chat. I sent three texts in all caps. One, Jesus. Two, Christ. Three, might as well throw the H in there. That was an out from left field, to put it lightly, thing to happen in the National Hockey League just in general and not this offseason. But I was as surprised as anyone that the number was anywhere near that.
This contract makes the 21-year-old Swedish center Leo Carlsson the highest paid player in the National Hockey League, just pushing past the $17 million mark that Kirill Kaprizov recently set before him. Obviously, Danny Briere putting Pat Verbeek and the Anaheim Ducks in a difficult position. Of course, they want to retain a player that they drafted, that they've developed, that they've seen become better and better year after year. But Shades, $18 million is $18 million.
Yes, I am always happy for the player that he got his bag, but at the same time, he hasn't proven yet that he's an $18 million player, which is what terrifies me if I'm the Anaheim Ducks. Now, with that being said, they did have a chance to sign him cheaper, but Pat Verbeek is known as a hardball negotiator and always tries to get the players to sign as cheaply as possible. And Leo Carlsson went, I'm going to go talk to other teams, see if anyone's going to offer me more with a via offer sheet, and that's exactly what the Flyers did. And well, good on Leo Carlsson because he and his agent did exactly what they should have done and got the bag.
We could go down so many different avenues talking about this topic as a whole. But Shades, I want to keep it with the Ducks and with Pat Verbeek because you extend the player, you match the offer sheet, which there are some people around the NHL who say that's a good idea. There are some who say that's way too much money for a player that has not proven it yet. Shades, this is still a rebuilding Anaheim Ducks team. They have a 22-year-old forward who scored 41 goals last year in Cutter Gauthier. He's a pretty tough negotiator himself. So who's to say that he won't go into Pat Verbeek's office when it's time and ask for just the same amount of money? So while it's great that you retain a potential number one center, down the road, this adds some questions.
Well, I mean, specifically with Cutter Gauthier, Verbeek can come into that negotiation going, we may have signed him for 18 million, but that's not what we offered. Some other team came out of left field and gave him more money to put us in a cap crunch, which they are probably going to be dealing with come Cutter Gautier's extension.
There were a couple of dominoes to fall in conjunction with this offer sheet coming from Danny Briere and the Philadelphia Flyers. And the first was Pavel Mintyukov, who was a restricted free agent himself. And during that period where the Anaheim Ducks and Pat Verbeek had to decide whether to match the contract from Danny Briere for Leo Carlsson, well, guess what? There were some whispers that Pavel Mintyukov could perhaps get an offer sheet himself. And in what could have been a panic move, Mintyukov gets extended 5 years, 7.2 million plus. That's a 22-year-old Russian defenseman, former number 10 overall pick in the first round, somebody who has gotten better and better each and every year. But you got to ask yourself, if you extended Leo Carlsson before and didn't play as tough of a negotiator as you said that Pat Verbeek was, which you were absolutely right in saying, could you have gotten yourself out of this mess by now?
Oh, it absolutely 100% could have been handled better. Because when it initially came out, Verbeek, specifically with Leo Carlsson, was looking to sign him around 9 to 10 million. They talked him up, I believe, to 11 or 12 million. Before the offer sheet finally went down, it was reported that Carlson was looking and was willing to accept 14 or 15, but Verbeek still said no. Then next thing you know, he signed for 18 million. And with Mintyukov, I would just like to point out that it was very heavily rumored that there was an offer sheet on the table for him, but I did find it kind of strange how we never found out who that team was officially. So yeah, it absolutely could have been a panic move, but it should have been, if we're being honest with you, because you don't want to have to deal with two offer sheets paying two players millions, several millions more than they arguably should be getting.
Even though the cap is going up, that's $25 million now per season tied up into two players, one on your back end and one up front. It's high risk. I will also note that the Ducks now have just under $10 million in available cap space, and that's
Yeah.
without trading any of their high-priced guys like Frank Vetrano, who they extended a couple of years back, who had a difficult season this past year, Chris Kreider, who they recently acquired from the New York Rangers, who makes north of $6 million. So they have $9.2 million to spend. That's without trading any of their high-priced contracts and with Cutter Gauthier to extend, who coming off 41 goals, and he's 22. I don't think he's going to be making any less than $15 million. And speaking of $15 million, well, actually, before we get there, we are going to talk about a $15 million per season man in just a moment. But there was one other domino to fall in conjunction with this whole situation, Shades. Trevor Zegras, he gets extended by the Philadelphia Flyers, whose offer sheet failed, of course, in their attempt to get Leo Carlsson. Zegras 4 years rather, and 9.125 per season.
And let's also not forget about Jamie Drysdale as well on their back end, because let's be honest, that offer sheet that they handed out to Carlson probably made both of those guys' agents go, you just offered him 18 million. We know you have the cap space. You're going to pay up a little bit.
And it opened the eyes, Shades, of a lot of general managers around the league who have restricted free agents who could potentially be poached in the near future. And one of those is Connor Bedard, the former number one overall pick. And Bedard had a history of a shoulder issue. And just a couple of weeks back, that got exacerbated. Actually, was the other shoulder that he had injured initially, but he still gets his bag, Shades. 5 years, $15 million per season. I see this as a move Chicago had to make, but I'll tell you, 5 years for your franchise guy, not being able to lock him down longer than that, just raises my eyebrow.
It doesn't really raise my eyebrow too much because we've seen a very similar contract extension, just different AAV wise with both Patrick Kane back in the day with the Blackhawks and as recently as Austin Matthews with the Maple Leafs. So all three of them are former first overall picks. And, well, I mean, we're all aware of the cap skyrocketing this past season going into this offseason, as well as expecting another huge cap spike next year before it finally starts to slow down again. So, if we're just going to compare this to the Leo Carlsson deal, this one looks like a bargain,
Yeah.
which is a very strange thing to say about a $15 million player in the National Hockey League after the last couple years.
But when you look at the recent event shades and Bedard going down during a skating drill and injuring that other shoulder, does it change your perspective on the deal?
Um, I wouldn't say so. I mean, Bedard, he's kind of earned it at this point because he's proven that he's more so towards the generational side of a number one draft pick than, say, just an Alexis Lafreniere or one of the former first overall picks of that caliber. So,
He's
I
in a
mean, it
different
is,
tier.
yeah, absolutely. And it is concerning a little bit that he went down in practice where he literally just tripped over his own feet and fell. And next thing you know, he's getting up, laboring the shoulder, skating off the ice instead of it being a contact injury. So that part kind of concerns me that he got injured non-contact. But I still think he's going to come back roaring because let's not forget, he's in his early 20s. It's not like he's in his mid 30s.
Yeah, Connor Bedard is 21 years old right now. He was drafted number one overall in the 2023 NHL entry draft. His first year in the NHL, 61 points. His second season, 67 points. And this past year, 75, where he reached the 30 goal plateau for the first time in his career. I will also note that Patrick Kane recorded 203 points in his first 219 NHL games with the Blackhawks. Connor Bedard has done the same. You mentioned it at the start of our discussion of the topic. Patrick Kane signed a 5-year contract after his ELC expired, and now Connor Bedard signs a 5-year deal as well. I will note that Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, their cap percentage was around 10.6% each year, and it went up or down by maybe a couple of percentage points. Connor Bedard is at 14.4% of the cap. So he is taking up a tad more money than his superstar counterpart from the Blackhawks of a different generation, but still interesting to look at nonetheless. And I will, agree with your point, Shades. I don't look at the shoulder issues as necessarily a hindrance. I see a player who's gotten better every year. To be honest, I see a player from 2025, 26 this past year until the rest of his career. I don't see him ever falling below 30 goals. And when you know you can have that out of your number one center, even though he may still be growing into his frame. That's an exceptional luxury to have, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, and he absolutely looks like the caliber of a perennial 90 to 100 plus point player. So I think
Before
they
we
did all
mo-
right.
Before we move on, Shades, I am going to note, I just touched on the fact that Bedard is 21 years old. He will hit unrestricted free agency at 26 years old after making $15 million per season. You talk about entering free agency at the prime of your career with a chance to make a good amount more than he's making right now, which is substantial. Shades, let's now transition into our final topic of the episode, and it's Dylan Larkin. He still has not gotten moved. We saw Vincent Trocheck get moved during the offseason, but the center market just will not move to Dylan Larkin and the Detroit Red Wings. And part of that is Dylan Larkin's fault because he is not giving Detroit a lot of options in terms of places to move him to.
Well, just to piggyback off that, you just brought it up to me earlier right before we started recording that he expanded his list one more team to the Dallas Stars, who have to sign Jason Robertson.
Right.
So that's not happening. But this one, with this situation, I find it just more shocking that Yzerman ended up stepping down than Larkin asking for a trade request because it's pretty common to see players asking for trade requests with long stretches on the same team without much success at all. And the Red Wings haven't made the playoffs since I believe 2016 or maybe 2017. But that part wasn't too shocking. But when the list of teams came out, it goes, okay, here we go again. A player's only given three or four teams, and all three or four teams are looking very unlikely.
Let's talk
So
about
yeah, I gonna make a prediction right now and saying he's gonna spend this entire season in Detroit.
let's talk about all four teams. The Dallas Stars, which were just added this month to the list, the very short list that Dylan Larkin has given the Red Wings. The Florida Panthers, who of course have won two out of the last three Stanley Cups. The Vegas Golden Knights, who were in the Stanley Cup final last year, and the Minnesota Wild. Shades, I think all four of these teams are in the market somewhat for a center. I think, Dallas and Minnesota, definitely towards the top of that list. I think Florida and Vegas would put Dylan Larkin in a category labeled as nice to have, but not necessarily something we need to get over the hump. For me, I think if the Panthers go into this season with their roster as currently constructed, they're the favorites to win the Stanley Cup. And I think Vegas, there's definitely a reason to say why they would be the favorite to come out of the Western Conference. But for Minnesota and Dallas, there's a reason to do this. But for two of the other teams, there's really not.
Especially with the Panthers after the Brady Tkachuk trade. I mean, they just traded three first round picks plus to get him. They're pretty much going to be right up against the cap, and they pretty much have no assets outside of roster players to give the Red Wings in a trade for Larkin. So I just see that as extremely unrealistic that that's going to happen. Vegas, they just had to trade away Pavel Dorofeyev to the Rangers because they couldn't pay him, and on a they're low key in a cap crunch too. So I don't see that happening either. Minnesota is a weird one because they are in a spot where they're very good, but I wouldn't put them in a top three in the West, even with the Kaprizov deal and the addition of Quinn Hughes. So I don't even know if this is gonna get resolved within the next 2 years, let alone this year.
While the Wild are highly motivated to land a top line center, you mentioned that
And
they
rightfully so.
they may need some more to get over the hump, right? They have Quinn Hughes, they have Kirill Kaprizov, they have a stud young goaltender in Jesper Wallstedt. So you could argue that if you add Dylan Larkin to that team, that they could become legitimate contenders in the Western Conference. The question is, do they have enough capital to get that trade done? The Stars are interesting, and Shades, I want to talk about this. The Red Wings, they reportedly engaged in talks with Dallas. You know who they asked for? Wyatt Johnston, who would match Larkin's $8.7 million average annual value. Wyatt Johnston leapfrogged from 71 points and 33 goals 2 years ago to 45 goals last year and 86 points. I would rather have Wyatt Johnston right now.
I mean, that's exactly the type of player that Detroit should be asking for in a Dylan Larkin trade.
If I'm saying if I'm
Es-
Dallas, I would rather have Wyatt Johnston. So like that's
oh
not
yeah.
even something I'm discussing.
No, if I'm the GM of the Stars, I'm hanging the phone up and arguably laughing you off the phone.
And well, Steve Yzerman, who perhaps made that phone call for the Detroit Red Wings, he stepped down this week. That's the other major wrinkle to this situation. Shades, I don't think the Yzer plan worked out too well over there in Detroit. And it was a tough situation for him. I feel like he tried to execute as much patience as possible, but there comes a time where you have to push all your chips in, and he just never did that.
So two major things here. One, this was behind the offer sheet for Leo Carlsson, a close second in most shocking things of the offseason, because I don't think anybody saw him stepping down. And two, when it came to the Yzer plan, this was probably a year or two ago. I was listening to Steve Dangle's podcast, and I found out some very important tidbits of information as to why the Red Wings are where they currently are. Yzerman wanted to tear it down more and do a more so full-on rebuild, but the owners kind of got into his ear pressure-wise because at the time, the Red Wings were getting a new arena, so they were kind of on his behind a little bit of let's speed this up a little bit to get back into the playoffs a little quicker. And that kind of put Yzerman in a tough spot because he had to change plans right then and there. Instead of doing full-on rebuild, he basically had to do more so of a retool. And well, we're clearly seeing right now it just wasn't working.
The last time the Detroit Red Wings made the playoffs was the 2015-2016 season. So a decade plus now that the Red Wings have not been playing past the regular season. Yzerman was hired in April of 2019 rather, and that was after a very successful stint with the Tampa Bay Lightning. But to have a 224, 251, and 9 record under his watch, it's just, it's disappointing. And I give Yzerman credit for stepping down and kind of initiating that transition. He's moving into an advisory role, by the way. He is a senior advisor right now to the governor and CEO, Chris Ilitch. So there's that. And who will take over for him, we will see. To avoid total offseason gridlock, Yzerman is running the day-to-day operations until a new general manager is officially hired. So, Shades, I'll tie the two topics together. Does this tell you that until a new GM comes in, Larkin's not getting traded? Because that's how I view it. I view no big moves are going to come because Yzerman stepped down, but he's staying in his role until somebody else takes over. For me, that tells me that the front office of the Red Wings is kind of stagnant right now, and they're going to wait until somebody else comes in and can execute a blueprint that they seem feasible for the future.
I think you're absolutely right here. It's kind of hard to see anything happening in the meantime while they're looking for a full-time GM. Then all of a sudden, boom, Larkin gets traded, and your fan base is going, how are you trading this guy in a place of transition within the organization? I don't think that would just make a lot of sense to begin with. Like you have to have all your GM and your power structure in place for anything to happen.
I completely agree with you. And, when the Buffalo Sabres clinched a playoff berth this past season, the Red Wings now officially own the longest active playoff appearance drought in the NHL at 10 consecutive seasons. They haven't won a playoff series since 2012, 2013. Their 13 season playoff series win drought is also the longest active streak in the league. So, whoever the new general manager is going to be, is going to have a very, very tall task ahead of them. And if you look at the last 3 years, Shades, 2023-24, 91 points. They missed out by a tiebreaker on the final night of the season. Did not qualify. 2 years ago, 86 points. They're out of the race with a few weeks left. And last year, 92 points, their most points, and the closest they had gotten over the last 3 seasons, blocked out of the wild card entirely.
Yeah, the East was a little all over the place last year, especially when it came to the overtime losses, which that's a whole other discussion for another day. But It's very odd with the position Detroit's in because they have a decent amount of talent on that roster. I mean, you still have Larkin, obviously. You got 24-year-old Lucas Raymond. You still have Alex DeBrincat, who's on the right side of 30 at 28. And you got on the back end, don't forget about Marco Casper, who's a young 22-year-old center with a high upside. And on the back end, don't forget, they still got Moritz Sider, who's 25, even though he feels like he's been in the league 10 years now. So you have stuff to work with there.
We will go into this deeper when we evaluate the Red Wings in our season preview, which we will be doing, by the way, starting with the Minnesota Wild and the Dallas Stars next week. But I just want to mention one more note on the Red Wings. They're in a middle class trap right now. They've got Andrew Kopp signed through 2027. They've got DeBrincat signed through 2027. They've got Sherratt signed to nearly $5 million dollars a season. They've got Justin Holl signed to nearly $4 million dollars a season. So for me, if I'm looking at the Red Wings, I would take those young pieces that you just discussed, Moritz Seider, your Lucas Raymond, and I would rebuild around those two. You have a top end young forward, you have a top end young defenseman, and I would tear it down. The core foundation is already locked in. Raymond is locked down until 2032, and Seider is an anchor there on the blue line. So Shades, with that said, let's bring it all the way back to Dylan Larkin. I'm actually going to disagree with you. I think it has to be a priority now for the Red Wings to move Dylan Larkin if they want to get out of this stage of mediocrity. Or do you
Well,
think that they could potentially compete? Do you think they're maybe knocking on the door? I just talked about how close they've come over the last 3 years. Do you agree with me? You think they should rebuild? Or do you think they should keep pushing? Because they've kept pushing for 10 years now.
so I will still disagree with you because up until the 2028-2029 season, when Larkin's full no trade becomes a modified no trade with a 10 team list, Larkin has full say of where he wants to go the next 2 seasons. And with the 4 teams that we've already mentioned, it just seems very unlikely unless he expands his list.
Which I
So
believe, if as time goes on, he will, if he doesn't get moved.
it could very well be that could very well be the case, but at the same time, he might not want to go to a team that's seemingly 2 to 3 years away. He wants to go to a team most likely that is a guarantee for a playoff spot and a actual cup contender.
I agree with you, but if you expand your list once, you'll expand your list twice. That's where I'm at on this situation. Now, how many teams are right on the cusp of winning a Stanley Cup? I don't know. I would say those four with Dylan Larkin would have a pretty good chance. But Shades, only time will tell. Any final thoughts on any of our topics before we let our fans go?
Don't lowball your players, people. If a player is willing to sign for 14 million instead of you getting trapped into signing him for 18 million, sign him for 14 million.
So just to recap everything that we discussed on episode 3 of Point to Point, Leo Carlsson, he receives an offer sheet from the Philadelphia Flyers that the Anaheim Ducks match. 5 years, $90 million. Leo Carlsson is now the highest paid player per season in the National Hockey League. Three dominoes actually fell as a result of that failed offer sheet. Trevor Zegras signs an extension in Philadelphia, as does Jamie Drysdale. Pavel Mintyukov signs an extension in Anaheim. There were whispers, but no confirmation of an offer sheet towards Mintyukov while the Ducks were evaluating the Leo Carlsson offer sheet. Connor Bedard, after injuring his other shoulder, well, he receives the bag. An extension, 5 years, $15 million per season. Connor Bedard will hit unrestricted free agency at the ripe age of 26 years old. Dylan Larkin still has not gotten traded. There are 4 teams that he could potentially get moved to by the start of the regular season. Those teams are the Dallas Stars, the Florida Panthers, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Minnesota Wild. As a result of Larkin not getting traded and other things, Steve Yzerman steps down from his role. He transitions to a new one within the Detroit Red Wings organization. With that said, this has been episode 3 of Point to Point for Michael Shade Sparacino. My name is Liam Go Time Godimer. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and as always, let's do that hockey.